The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. This is part two of a trilogy. I introduced the story of Sylvia. She's chapter 7 in book 3. I have it right over there. Sylvia, who was grieving her husband and daughter, and Angel Amalie. That's how we entitled that chapter. If you go back a couple of episodes, I introduced her story. In short, she was a young bride. She and her husband had a daughter who was just about 2 years old. So she was a young woman, had a career, early in the marriage, early in motherhood, when her husband and young daughter went out on some sort of errand and died in an automobile accident. So her life just imploded on her all at once. In the dream where I met her, she chose to kind of bring me into her creaky house, like being awake in the night. I think she might have awakened at least once in the night to use the restroom, and then felt frustrated that she knew that it would probably be hard to fall back to sleep. And then she had to listen to just the sounds that houses make of uh, air conditioning going on and off, or, a little appliance noises, or the creaky sounds that buildings make when they expand and contract, and just feeling very alone in the night. Well, in the dream, when she got up to go to the bathroom, there was a song on a turntable, and even the turntable was significant in that there's lots of ways that we can listen to music, but a record on a turntable just goes round and round and round, and that's the way she felt her grief was cycling, that she just couldn't get out of the incessant sadness of her life. And the song was Natalie Cole singing Unforgettable, which is a song about love, but it's in a minor key, and it has a sad tone, the way that loving can hurt, that being away from those you love, or as she certainly felt, that it just went on and on. Anyway, that was the basics of it. I explained in that episode that you can go back and find it. It was 2 episodes ago, where she described how difficult it was for her to go on. She kept her job. She got a settlement about the accident, was able to pay off her house. She said she could have been a lady of leisure, but what would be the point of that? Then she'd just have more of her own company. It was at least good to have a reason to get up and get dressed and get out of the house to go to work. But she watched way too much television, and she had a hard time re-engaging in life in a way that was at all hopeful, until she got uterine cancer diagnosis that was dire from the beginning, and that took her life. So she was telling us about what it was like to be her, and that was mostly what I dealt with in the previous episode in this trilogy. Our method on this podcast is to do the second part of the trilogy with what we call compassionate response. Compassion means to suffer with, to be with another person in their suffering. I think of the marriage vow as beloveds promising each other that I will be with you even if suffering comes our way. In a marriage vow, poverty, sickness, death, I will be with you in it even if I can't fix it. You probably had some occasion to be a compassionate companion to someone, and I'm going to be addressing that. And in this particular podcast, I'm wondering if any of you in this audience are in deep grief right now, or have a recent memory of it. Maybe it's lifted some, but or if there's someone in your circle that you know is in deep grief. Sometimes that can be very obvious, like something as tragic as losing a husband and 2-year-old in the same moment. But other times, people, you might know somebody that's who's lost a parent that died in their 90s, and you think, well, that person lived a long life. But sometimes even predictable deaths of people who lived long and happy lives can still be uh, very hard for people that are left grieving. Everybody does this a little differently. So anyway, we'll be talking a bit about compassion and how to be compassionate, and from the experience of going through deep suffering, grief, maybe you could contribute. What do you think worked for you? Was there anything that you found particularly helpful when someone reached out to you with compassion? So that's kind of what I'm trying to do today. Um, One of the things that, we do two conversations with any of these people whose stories are in the books. One of them is the one where we first meet them, where we're helping them make a crossing from a lowest kind of therapeutic level of afterlife, where they got what they needed initially, and then they move up. We're kind of the discharge staff helping them move from a place where they don't need this kind of concentrated care any longer and are ready for more possibility. But then the second conversation is going back to them and asking, may we please use your story in a book? Maybe tell it publicly. And that might be a year or two later. And so, however it works in the afterlife, whether they're conscious of time or at least succession, things happening after other things, um, they often have had experiences since we last saw them that they inform us about, that teach us a lot. That's why we entitled this, the subtitle of this newest book, Please Let Me Explain, because oftentimes people do such a nice job of explaining things that we wouldn't have thought about. Well, anyway, I have prayed to Sylvia and asked her if she would be with me and in my cognition, because I'm talking about her and about her story, and I want to do her justice. But um, one of the things that she and others have told me is that they needed to they needed to really internalize the idea that it's not necessary that your tragedy define you. One person said, don't let the worst thing that happened to you define you. I remember one person talking about he had felt like after I think it was a suicide. That, of course, is not Sylvia's issue, but I think someone had died of suicide and said, uh, after doing that here in the afterlife, I felt like I had to wear a name tag that identified me as a person who had committed suicide, and so that I would bring shame into every new uh, interaction. And who said that he was taught that you don't have to be defined by the worst thing that ever happened to you. Sometimes when persons have some sort of scandal attached to them that goes public, think of public figures that might have done lots of praiseworthy things in their life, but there was an episode, a time in their life where they were involved in some maybe sexual scandal or some financial scandal or something, and their obituary will mostly be about the positive things they did, but there always seems to be the need to get that sour note in there and remind everybody of this other thing. Well, anyway, I've learned that in the afterlife, people uh, sometimes expect that that's the way they should behave, and that they ought to hang their head because part of their story is something that they think of as shameful or saddening. There's nothing shameful about dying in an automobile accident, but in Sylvia's case, just the fact that she was a widow and who had lost her only child, she felt like she wore that kind of as a name tag, and that going to work, she as much as told us that she never again hosted even a dinner party in her home, because she said, who would want to come to my house? It's full of sadness and grief. Well, that was her prerogative. That was her experience, but she had other possibilities. She could have pushed against that and at least tried maybe with somebody sort of safe and try to, kind of get a little bit back in circulation and do things that were joyful in her home. But she just didn't have the energy, or for whatever reason didn't do that. But how about that idea? What do you think of that? Don't let the worst thing define you, like a name tag that you have to wear forever. Well, I moved that through my Catholic Christian tradition and spirituality. And it happens that today is what we call Thursday of Holy Week, Holy Thursday, and tomorrow is Good Friday. Well, yes, we have crucifixes around a lot to remind us of what I think of as Jesus's greatest act of love, is saying, I'm going to love everybody always. And if you don't like it, go ahead and kill me. If that's you're going to threaten me, I'm not going to stop loving just because you don't want me to. I really think that's what his death is about, that he annoyed people by breaking their rules and just said, loving is more important than your rules. Anyway, that's what I think. Um, so I don't know how to move from there, but what do you make of that? I just think Jesus went through all the pain of the horror of his death, but he taught us to move through it quickly. 3 days later, he rises. And so I think of that as waiting in joyful hope. I've had my share of grief and sadnesses and periods where I had to push through um, something troubling and hurtful. But I try to wait in joyful hope. I just try to think, well, you know what? And one of the benefits of being an older person at 68 now, when a new thing comes my way that saddens me or upsets me, I can think, well, you know what? There were other times in my life where this might have derailed me, where I might have been all spun into all kind of weirdness, but this too shall pass, something like that. Well, one thing that I would wonder is, have you ever heard people say about grief, you never get over it, or you will never get over it? I think I've heard that mostly with parents who have lost a child. And sometimes the grieving parent will say that, or sometimes someone who's trying to be consoling will say that to them, you'll never get over it. Well, count me out. Maybe that's true, and maybe some of you have, ascribe to that. I just feel like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The fact that I'm in great pain right now doesn't mean that that past event that is causing such pain necessarily will have that kind of power over me always. I don't want to live that way. I'd rather try to push against it, even if I feel like I have very little energy to expend. When I don't have very much energy to expend, I'm reminded that I belong to the creator of the universe who loves me beyond all measure, and that I can say, I can't do this on my own. Please don't let me even try. Would you pick me up and carry me? Or would you give me at least a little more energy so that I can expend it trying to push through the circumstance that I'm in? You'll never get over it. Count me out. I don't want to think that way. One thing that I wonder if Sylvia, one thing that didn't come up in her circumstance was service to others. There's nowhere in the story that she told us that said, after the deaths of my husband and daughter, as I looked around about how to create my life, I thought, I think I need to go out in service to others. She didn't say that. I don't know that there, it was a short conversation. Maybe she did find meaning in some sort of service, but I recommend that because, for one thing, loving others, especially loving persons who have need of something that we might be able to provide, has its own dignity, its own value, and it can change the vibration. It can change the thoughts in one's head. to engage in the world of another and not let one's own grief or one's own inner circular thinking carry one away. So if any of you are uh, struggling mightily with grief right now, is there some way that you can do some short-term new thing? Can you try some little act of service, some kind of volunteerism that maybe has a very low threshold where you don't have to make a big commitment, but that you could show up and make sandwiches, or you could do something that, do a cleanup day or something. There's always things around you where good people get together to do a good thing, and it doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. You can kind of test the waters and see. I didn't hear her do that, and I wonder, I'm not a big one on looking backward, and I don't know whether Sylvia, she doesn't strike me as somebody that looks over her shoulder and regrets what she did or didn't do. But I think that service for others is a good tool in the toolkit when you're in grief and sadness, is to say, well, that doesn't mean that I can't do something. I might feel terrible because of what's happened, but that doesn't mean I couldn't help somebody. And I think that's a kind of a way of taking uh, crap and turning it into fertilizer, taking the pain that you're in and using it as a motivating force to do something for somebody, even for a little while. I wonder if you know anybody like Sylvia. When you hear her story, is there anyone in your life who has been through a really catastrophic loss, maybe a death, maybe a medical diagnosis, a financial setback, a divorce, something that has sent their life spinning? And is there something you could do to reach out? She mentioned that many people did reach out to her in appropriate ways. Both her parents and her husband's parents were still living. She said plenty of people reached out to her, but she really didn't feel she had the capacity to be very receptive to their kindness. And it's not uncommon for people in pain to push away others. Um, I wonder if if you've ever gone away because somebody gave you the indicator that they wanted you to leave them alone in their grief. Is it possible that you could circle back around and try a different tack, or do some little kindness or some little thing so that that you don't allow somebody to utterly chase you off? Now, I have been chased off. There's been one particular time in my life where I can remember a person in grief that I was trying to be compassionate toward eventually just told me to leave him alone and uh, and not try to take his grief or whatever. And so I did that, but not. It took more than one gesture to try to shut me down. I don't know if I'm saying that as well as I'd like, but is there anybody that might have kind of pushed you away, where maybe if you tried a different way or just kind of hit them at a different moment or something, that you might have a little more staying power? Maybe you're the exception to the rule, and they might be trying to push everybody away, but somehow um, they eventually tolerate your kindness or your attempt to include. Anyway, that's just a thought. Um, I wonder what Sylvia would say to a grieving person. Would she, if she could talk to her former self, what might she say to herself? Um, One thing that can be important is to have compassion for oneself, and do some self-talk where you talk to your own heart of hearts and say, I'm so sorry that you've been through what you've been through. Of course, you feel terrible. Um, I do this with myself sometimes, and say, but I love you, to yourself. And I trust that you are sturdy and that you're well built and that you will not only survive, but that one day you will thrive. Can you say that to yourself or something like it in your own words? Um, I don't think I ever heard Sylvia say that, at least not before leaving this earth. There's a part of her story that I hope you'll read if you choose to look it up in book 3. She talks about her angel, Amalie, who she didn't know she even had. She didn't know there were guardian angels. She wasn't a religious person. But the guardians in the afterlife very often prove themselves to the one they love and guard by saying, yeah, remember when we were in kindergarten? And then they'll come up with memories that prove that they were there and that they were knowledgeable. Well, Sylvia took to Amalie, her guardian, and said she did that thing. She proved to me that she was somebody who had loved me and known me all along. And then she didn't let me push her away completely. She stayed with me and she was patient with me. And she said, I know that you want to move slowly and that's your perfect right, but I'm going to be here with you in it as you move slowly. Could you be like a guardian? Could you be like that with somebody and say, I don't mean to push, at least not too much. I only want to nudge a bit, but I want you to know that I'd like to be around for the long haul. One of the things that Sylvia decided about herself was that she was bad company. I'm remembering back, there was a time in my life when I was at Arizona State University's Newman Center, and we went into a large capital campaign. We were raising $6.5 million to build a new campus ministry center. One of the things I remember learning about asking people for money is to leave them free to make their own decisions without you assuming things. You can talk yourself out of asking someone for a financial gift by thinking, oh, they can't afford it. Or, oh, they just did this other gift. Sometimes philanthropy is public and it gets thanked, in public. And you might say, oh, well, they just gave this other gift to the hospital. They probably don't want to be asked right now. You can begin to take away the freedom of other people by the way you think. Have you ever said, oh, in Sylvia's case, the way she did it was to say, nobody'd want to come to my house for a dinner party because it's a house of sadness. Well, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. She wouldn't ask anybody because she presumed what their answer would be, that they wouldn't want to come around her. Have you ever done that, or are you doing it? Or if you see anybody else doing that, can you persist in a way that's loving and at least partly welcome? Anyway, I remember learning that about asking for financial gifts, and sometimes when I hear myself begin to be on both sides of a relationship, I'm in a relationship, but I'm assuming what you're going to say or do if I say or do something. One thing, I love this quote. This is a direct quote from Sylvia. Remember, she wasn't a religious person, and she really, at a young age, wasn't really given to think of eternal things. She just was busy living her marriage and child rearing. But in her afterlife, she said, whatever the universe is, it was not built in such a way that one calamity would have an eternal opportunity to ruin everything. That was a learning on her part, and she spoke that, and I think it just needs to be engraved somewhere. I'm going to read it again. This is Sylvia talking to you. Whatever the universe is, it was not built in such a way that one calamity would have an eternal opportunity to ruin everything. That was very hard-earned wisdom on her part, because her lived experience was that one calamity did ruin everything for a long time. She had to emerge out the other end of it after her death to be able to say that whatever the universe is, it wasn't built in such a way that one calamity would have an eternal opportunity to ruin everything. I want to leave us today with one thought. And I was thinking of, I like to play cards, and many card games have a wild card. something that some card that has the ability to be more than one thing or several things, or somehow to overcome every other thing, every normal thing, a wild card. Is there a way that that if you're in grief, could you play a wild card? Rather than accepting the parameters of what your grieving is, could you say, and if you're a believer in a creator or the Holy Spirit who might be with you, can you say, would you deal me a wild card? Is there a way in which I can come out of the patterns that I've accepted that I think are the boss of me? And could there be a wild card? Or is there a way in which I could propose something that could help me be a wild card in the life of someone who's sort of given up? Is there a way in which I can cajole or joke or play or something that might help people leave behind, even if only for a short time, patterns that they just think just have to be observed? And could I be the fun factor somehow, or the wild card? I'm thinking it's, it's Holy Thursday, tomorrow's Good Friday, Easter's this weekend. I just love the story of the horror of the public death of Jesus in such a way that felt like the entire culture, the Romans and the temple authorities and his own followers, all betraying him and leaving him to die so horribly. And then he's just this wild card. The Holy Spirit, however it happens, Easter morning, when they think they're on their way to just do funeral things, just to do a sad task, a funeral thing, anoint a body. Instead, boom, there is no body to be anointed, and something crazy's going on. They don't know exactly what it is yet. In one of the versions, there's an angel or a young man dressed in white who says, go, you're going to see him in Galilee. And in John's story, this tomb is in a garden, and there's some guy that's in the garden, and the Mary Magdalene presumes it must be a gardener, so she goes up to him and says, "Pardon me, gardener, can you tell me where the body might be?" And he just says, "Mary." All he has to do is call her name. He didn't even have to say it's me. All he had to do was say, "Here I am. I'm right here." If even for somebody like Sylvia was not a religious person, you don't necessarily have to be in order to be surprised by grace. The Creator, the Holy Spirit, can be the wild card. So it might just be that that if you or somebody you know and care about are in a sad pattern, like that looping record, Unforgettable, Natalie Cole on the middle of the night, if somebody's in something like that, could you be the agent of the Holy Spirit that is the wild card that somehow brings joy in an unexpected time and place? Well, that's it for now. The next time we'll talk a little bit more about this story. And the third part of the trilogy will be spiritual practices that might help if this story finds a home in you. So for now, I'm Father Nathan, and I'm grateful that you cared enough to be a part of this podcast. Remember that I'm always praying for you, and whatever is most on your heart is where the way I form my prayer. I just say, for any who are in the audience of the Joyful Friar podcast, please move into the deepest part of their heart and bring whatever healing and joyful hope you can. So with that, I am grateful that you were here today and hope to see you again. God bless you. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.